This happened during the blizzard of February 2022. I was 28 years old, working as a property manager for a cluster of vacation cabins in northern Minnesota. The storm had been predicted for days, but nobody expected it to hit as hard as it did. 3 feet of snow in less than 24 hours, winds that could knock you off your feet, and temperatures dropping to -30. I was doing my final rounds before the storm really kicked in, checking that all the vacant cabins were secure. We had 12 properties scattered across about 40 acres of dense pine forest, connected by narrow dirt roads that were already disappearing under the snow. Most of the cabins were empty. It was midweek in February, not exactly peak season. The last cabin on my list was Unit 7, the one furthest from the main road. It sat at the edge of a frozen lake, beautiful in summer but absolutely desolate in winter. The access road was already bad, and my truck was struggling even with chains on the tires. I should have turned back, but I had this thing about finishing what I started. When I got to Unit 7, something was immediately wrong. Fresh tire tracks led to the cabin, barely visible under the falling snow. The cabin was supposed to be vacant. I'd checked the booking system 3 times. No reservations for another 2 weeks. But there was smoke coming from the chimney, and lights glowing behind the frost-covered windows. My first thought was squatters. We'd had problems before with people breaking into the cabins during winter, using them for shelter. I grabbed my flashlight and the master key, figuring I'd check it out and call the sheriff if needed. The wind was screaming by then, and I had to lean into it just to walk. The front door was unlocked, not broken, not forced, unlocked with a key. Inside, the cabin was warm, almost uncomfortably so. The fireplace was roaring, and every light in the place was on. There were wet boots by the door, a heavy winter coat hanging on the hook. Fresh groceries in the kitchen, food cooking on the stove. Looked like soup or stew, still bubbling. I called out, "Hello? This is property management. This cabin isn't supposed to be occupied." No answer. The bathroom door was closed, and I could hear water running. I knocked. "Excuse me, I need to speak with you about your reservation." The water kept running, but nobody responded. I tried the handle, locked from the inside. That's when I noticed other things. Men's clothes laid out on the bed, size double extra large at least. Work boots that had to be size 14 or bigger. But strangest of all, there was mail on the kitchen counter, addressed to the cabin, with my name on it. I picked up the envelope with shaking hands. It was postmarked 3 days ago, sent from a town about 50 miles north. Inside was a single piece of paper with one line written in blocky handwriting. "Stop coming here alone." The water in the bathroom suddenly stopped. Heard the lock click. The door started to open. I didn't wait to see who came out. I ran. Slipped twice on the icy porch, made it to my truck, and gunned it backwards down the access road. In my rearview mirror, I could see a massive figure standing in the doorway of the cabin, backlit by all those lights. Just standing there, watching me leave. The storm hit full force on my drive back. Took me 2 hours to go 8 miles. I called the sheriff from the main office, but they couldn't send anyone out until the storm passed. That was 3 days later. When we finally got back to Unit 7, the cabin was exactly as it should have been. Locked, cold, empty. No sign anyone had been there at all. The sheriff thought I was seeing things, stress from the storm. But I knew what I saw, what I felt in that place. I found out later, doing some research, that the previous property manager had disappeared 5 winters ago, during a blizzard. He was doing his final rounds, checking the cabins. They found his truck abandoned on the access road to Unit 7. Engine still running. Driver door open. Never found him. I quit 2 weeks later. Moved to Arizona. And every time I see snow on the news, every time they talk about a winter storm, I think about that figure in the doorway. I think about that water stopping, that lock clicking open. I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed just 30 seconds longer. The new property manager they hired called me about a month ago. Said she'd been finding things in Unit 7. Men's clothing that didn't belong to any guests. Size double extra large. Size 14 boots. She wanted to know if I knew anything about it. I told her to never go to that cabin alone. Especially not in winter. Especially not during a storm. She laughed and said I was being dramatic. That was 3 weeks ago. Last week, another blizzard hit northern Minnesota. I hope she didn't go through what I experienced or worse. I worked at a 24-hour gas station in rural Montana from 2021 to early 2023. I took that job after my divorce because it came with a small apartment above the station. The isolation was exactly what I needed at the time. Just me, the occasional trucker, and miles of empty highway surrounded by forest. The winter of 2022 was particularly brutal. We'd get these stretches where the temperature wouldn't rise above zero for weeks. During one of these cold snaps in January, something happened that made me quit that job and move back to civilization. It started on a Tuesday night. I was working the overnight shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Around 2 a.m., the snow started falling heavy, and the wind picked up something fierce. I hadn't seen a customer in 3 hours. I was restocking the coffee station when I heard the bell above the door chime. An old woman walked in, maybe in her 70s, wearing a thin house dress. No coat, no shoes, just this floral dress like it was summer. Her feet were blue-purple from the cold, leaving wet footprints on the linoleum. Her gray hair was perfectly styled though, like she'd just come from a salon. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I rushed over to her. "Where's your coat? Your shoes?" She looked at me with the saddest eyes I'd ever seen. "I'm looking for my daughter. Have you seen my daughter? She said she'd meet me here." I guided her to the chair behind the counter and grabbed the emergency blanket from our first aid kit. Her skin was ice cold, but she wasn't shivering. That should have been my first red flag. When you're that cold, you should be shivering. "What's your daughter's name?" I asked, wrapping the blanket around her while reaching for the phone to call for help. "Rebecca," she said. "Rebecca Mills. She works here. She told me to come if I ever needed help." My blood went cold. Rebecca Mills had worked at this station. I knew because her photo was still on the memorial wall in the back room. She'd died in a car accident on the highway 2 winters ago, sliding on black ice into a tree. I'd replaced her. "Ma'am, I think you're confused. Let me call someone to help you." The phone was dead. The storm must have knocked out the lines. My cell had no signal either, typical for this area in bad weather. I looked back at the old woman, and she was staring at me with those sad, hollow eyes. "You're not Rebecca," she said, sounding confused. "Where's Rebecca? She promised she'd be here." I tried to keep my voice calm. "I'm Sarah. I work here now. Let's get you warmed up, and when the storm passes, we'll find your family." She stood up abruptly, the blanket falling to the floor. "I need to find Rebecca. She's waiting for me." She walked toward the door, and I followed, trying to convince her to stay. But when she pushed the door open, the bell didn't chime, and when she stepped outside, she didn't leave footprints in the fresh snow. I stood in the doorway, watching her walk barefoot into the blizzard until she disappeared into the white. When I looked down, the wet footprints she'd left on the floor were gone. The blanket I'd wrapped around her was neatly folded on the chair, completely dry. I locked the door and spent the rest of the night huddled behind the counter. When my replacement arrived at 7 a.m., I asked him about Rebecca Mills' family. "Sad story," he said. "Her mom died the same night as her. Heart attack when she heard about the accident. They say she was trying to get to the hospital, but her car broke down. They found her frozen on Highway 191, about a mile from here. Barefoot, wearing nothing but a house dress. I worked 3 more weeks at that station, and the old woman came back twice more. Both times during blizzards, both times looking for Rebecca. The third time she brought someone with her. It was 3 a.m., another brutal storm. The doorbell chimed, and there she was in her floral dress. But this time, a young woman stood beside her, wearing a gas station uniform with a name tag I couldn't quite read in the dim light. "I found her," the old woman said, smiling for the first time. "I found my Rebecca." The younger woman looked at me, and I recognized her from the memorial photo. Same dark hair, same kind eyes, but her face was wrong. Too pale, with dark shadows under her eyes. She mouthed 2 words. "Get out." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my coat and keys, left everything else, and drove through that blizzard to the next town. I called the station owner from there and quit over the phone. Told him I had a family emergency and couldn't come back. He understood. Apparently, I wasn't the first night shift worker to leave suddenly. He mentioned something about installing new security cameras and switching to day shift only for winter months. I drove past that station once about 6 months later during the day. It was boarded up. A new sign said it was being demolished for safety reasons. Something about the foundation being unstable, the building sinking into old mining tunnels underneath. But I know the real reason they closed it. It's because Rebecca Mills finally clocked in for her shift. And when you're working the night shift alone, the last thing you want is a coworker who's been dead for 2 years. The thing that haunts me most? On my last night, after they appeared together, I checked the register. Someone had made a purchase while I was in the back room before they appeared. The receipt showed 2 hot chocolates and a blanket. Paid in cash. The timestamp was from January 15th, 2020. The night Rebecca and her mother died. It was January 2023, and I was driving back to Denver from my parents' house in Nebraska. I'd made this drive dozens of times. It's about 7 hours on I-80, straight shot, boring as hell. But this time I decided to leave at night to avoid traffic, and that decision nearly cost me everything. The weather was clear when I left around 9 p.m. Cold, maybe 15 degrees, but the roads were dry and I had a full tank. My phone was charged, I had snacks and water, and I'd even thrown a sleeping bag in the back just in case. I'm usually overprepared like that. Anxiety thing from too many true crime podcasts. About 2 hours in, just past the Colorado border, it started snowing. Not heavy, just those fat, lazy flakes that drift down and make everything look like a Christmas card. I turned on my playlist and kept cruising. Another hour later, the snow got heavier. Then heavier still. By midnight, I could barely see 50 feet ahead. I should have stopped at the next exit, found a motel. But the GPS said I was only 3 hours from home, and I'd driven in snow before. Plus, the next exit was 20 miles away. I slowed down to about 35 miles per hour and put my hazards on. That's when I saw the car on the side of the road. A sedan. Looked like a Toyota. Hazard lights blinking. The driver door was open, interior light on, but I couldn't see anyone inside. I slowed down more as I passed. No one in the driver's seat. No one standing outside. Just an abandoned car with the door wide open in a blizzard. 5 miles later, another car. Same thing. Door open, lights on, nobody there. This one was a pickup truck, newer model. The snow on the hood suggested it had been there maybe 30 minutes. A horrible feeling settled in my stomach. 2 abandoned cars in 5 miles? During a blizzard? Something was very wrong. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but I had no signal. Not even emergency calls only. Just no service at all. Which was weird because I'd had full bars an hour ago. 10 minutes later, I saw brake lights ahead. A car moving, thank God. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't moving. It was stopped, just sitting in the middle of the lane with its brake lights on. I carefully moved to pass it in the left lane, and as I did, I looked over. The driver was there, sitting upright, hands on the wheel, looking straight ahead. But something was wrong with their posture. Too rigid, too still. The windows were fogged up, but I could see well enough to notice they weren't moving. At all. Not even breathing that I could tell. I kept driving, my hands shaking now. The rational part of my brain said carbon monoxide. Maybe they all had carbon monoxide poisoning. Pulled over, feeling sick. But that didn't explain the open doors on the first 2 cars. 3 more miles, 2 more cars. Both with drivers sitting frozen at the wheel. The snow was coming down so hard now I could barely see, and I was down to 20 miles per hour. That's when my car dinged. Low fuel light. But that was impossible. I'd filled up before leaving. Should have had plenty to get home. I looked at the gauge, and my blood went cold. Nearly empty. In 3 hours, I'd somehow burned through almost a full tank. The trip meter showed I'd gone 47 miles since my last stop. 47 miles. but I'd been driving for 3 hours. The next exit was supposedly 2 miles ahead. I had to risk it. As I crept forward, I saw more cars. Dozens of them, scattered on both sides of the highway, all with their lights on. Some with doors open, some with people still inside, all motionless. Then I saw him. A man walking along the shoulder, moving against the wind. He was wearing a bright yellow vest, like highway patrol or a tow truck driver. He was waving his arms, trying to flag me down. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, but I was almost out of gas and terrified. I slowed down but didn't stop, just rolled my window down a crack. He jogged up, and I could see his face clearly in my headlights. Normal-looking guy, maybe 40s, clean-shaven. But his eyes were wrong. Completely black, like the pupils had swallowed everything else. "Miss, you need to pull over," he said. His breath didn't fog in the cold. "There's been an incident. All vehicles need to stop for inspection." "What kind of incident?" I asked, foot hovering over the gas pedal. "Chemical spill," he said. But he was smiling now. "Hazardous materials. You've been exposed. You need to pull over for decontamination." Behind him, I saw shapes moving between the abandoned cars. More people in yellow vests, all walking with that same purposeful stride, all converging on my car. I floored it. The car fishtailed in the snow, but I kept control and shot past him. In my rear view, I saw him standing there, still smiling, not running after me, just watching. They all were. A dozen figures in yellow vests, just standing in the snow watching me drive away. The exit came up fast. I barely made the turn, skidding sideways onto the off-ramp. There was a truck stop at the bottom, lights blazing, normal-looking people inside. I coasted in on fumes, filled up with shaking hands while looking over my shoulder the whole time. The kid working the register looked at me strange when I came in. "You okay, miss? You look like you've seen a ghost." I asked him if he'd heard about any chemical spill on I-80. He shook his head. "Roads are closed, though. State Patrol shut down the highway about an hour ago. Blizzard conditions. Nobody's supposed to be out there." I stayed in that truck stop until dawn, sitting in a booth where I could see the parking lot. Called the State Patrol to report the abandoned cars. They said they'd send units when the storm cleared. My phone was in my pocket the whole time, recording audio for a voice memo I'd started before the storm hit. I'd been recording song ideas. When I played it back later, there's a section during the time I was on that highway. 3 hours of recording that should be there. But the timestamp jumps from 11:47 p.m. to 2:51 a.m. 3 hours just missing, except for one thing. Right at the skip, there's a voice. Not mine. It's male, calm, and it says, "This one's awake. Let her go." I don't drive at night anymore, and I'll never take I-80 through Colorado in winter again. Because sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see those black eyes and that smile. I can still see all those people sitting frozen in their cars.